Good afternoon, everyone. We welcome you to this very important discussion on the topic of COVID-19 vaccine education access to information, particularly for people within the disability community. Please note before we begin that an ASL interpreted video of the event will be available on our YouTube channel within a few weeks. My name is Sabina Khan. I am a staff attorney at Disability Rights New York, the New York State protection and advocacy system for people with disabilities. My pronouns are she and her. I am a South Asian American female with long dark hair. I am wearing a mustard colored shirt and a navy jacket, although it looks black on Zoom. And I'm sitting behind a white wall. And I have the pleasure of co-moderating this event with my colleague, Diana. Diana, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Sabina. My name is Diana Radigan, and I am an intake specialist from Disabilities Rights of New York. I have been working for this organization for 8 years. I am a Hispanic woman, and I'm so happy to be here opening this panel with Sabina and this specialist doctor here.
And before we introduce our wonderful guests, I just wanted to say that as we continue to face the uncertainties of this pandemic, we wanted this forum to be an opportunity to provide access to information for individuals who are uncertain about the risks or the necessity for taking the vaccine, particularly those who may have underlying comorbidities or health conditions, or those who have loved ones who have underlying health issues. And we really hope that our viewers are able to utilize today's discussion to assist them in making an informed decision regarding the COVID-19 vaccine. Of course, as a disclaimer, the information you receive today is not meant to replace any medical advice that you do receive or that you will receive from your medical provider, but we encourage our viewers to take the information they receive today and to use it to have a deeper discussion with their own providers if they have one, and to have a deeper discussion with folks in their community who may be hesitant about taking the vaccine. So without further ado, today we have two guests who have taken their time out of their incredibly busy schedules, I'm sure, to speak with us on the issue of vaccine hesitancy. We have Dr. Stephen Cook, pediatrician and assistant professor at the University of Rochester Medical Center, Department of Pediatrics, and Dr. Stephen Sulkes, professor of the University of Rochester Medical Center, Department of Pediatrics, Developmental and Behavioral Pediatrics. Welcome, Dr. Cook and Dr. Sulkes. Thank you both so much for being here today. We are incredibly thrilled that you are joining us for this discussion, and we're looking forward to your professional insights and your perspectives that could hopefully shed light on a lot of the understandable apprehension and questions regarding the COVID-19 vaccine, particularly as it relates to people with disabilities. So I am going to turn the floor over to Deanna.
Perfect. Thank you, Sabina. So let's start giving the opportunity to both doctors to tell us a little more about themselves, the work that they do, and the connection that they have to this event today.
Okay, I'll jump in since I'm unmuted already. This is Steve Sulkes. We're both Steve, so it's going to be a little tricky, but I am a developmental behavioral pediatrician at Golisano Children's Hospital in Rochester. I've been working with people with developmental disabilities for my whole career. That's my main and primary focus. I am the co-director of the Strong Center for Developmental Disabilities, which is the University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities at University of Rochester. I used to be the director of our LEND program, which is the interdisciplinary training program. And I should have said at the outset that I am an aging Anglo male with pronouns he and him, and I am the last aging Anglo male who you're ever going to see wearing a tie. Apparently, nobody ever does that anymore. the other stuff I do is that I am the past president of the American Academy of Developmental Medicine and Dentistry, which is an organization of physicians, dentists, and other healthcare providers that focuses on healthcare and healthcare delivery for people across the lifespan with developmental disabilities. And it's a small, sparky organization of which we're very proud. And with that connection, I'm on a bunch of committees across New York State focusing on health for people in this population. So I spend a lot of time in meetings like this.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dr. Stephen Cook, and if you just shout out Steve, you'll get somebody to answer. So that's always a good point. I almost wore a tie today, Steve, but I grabbed this casual shirt, nothing to go with it, and I probably would have put a tie on, and my daughters would have probably ripped me apart. So I'm glad I didn't do that. I am also an Anglo white male, not nearly as much hair as my colleague, Dr. Sulkes has, and I want to thank everyone. I'm a med-peds trained physician, and I work at the primary care practice at Golisano Children's Hospital, seeing routine children. I do a lot of work around nutrition and exercise for children and families, and I also have been working with New York State Department of Health, both in Medicaid around policies for children, but also over the past 2 years doing pandemic work, namely working on testing guidelines to the community and helping run vaccination sites at various sites in our community, as well as doing homebound vaccines. So thank you very much for inviting me.
You both, very important work that you both are doing. So thank you. Now, turning to our first question, some people may say, we're not where we were in 2020. We've made a lot of progress, thankfully, with the infection rate. Not as many people are dying from COVID-19 as they were previously. So what's the big deal if some people choose not to take the vaccine or are hesitant to take the vaccine? Why, from your standpoint as medical professionals with your vast experience, is it still important to address this issue about vaccine hesitancy today?
Well, the reality is that this is still very much a severe illness in our population. We have come a long way with obviously making vaccines, as well as some medications, therapeutics, but as we've seen new mutations arise, the medications, monoclonal antibodies, antiviral pills, sometimes aren't working as well as the first strains that we tested them on. So the reality is that millions of people have died from this, and there are still millions more who are still highly susceptible, people who are elderly, people who have immunocompromised. And so vaccinating as many people as possible will just help reduce the chance as well as help protect those people. I mean, if you are in one of those high-risk groups and you haven't been vaccinated yet, obviously you're doing a great job staying away from people, but that's also not a great way to live. And I think it's really important to try to help us protect ourselves, protect each other, and protect our society going forward. So there's, so much data is out now, well over a year of active use throughout the world, that we know the safety of these vaccines is very clear. But the question of people who are so hesitant now is mostly related to just unanswered questions and a significant amount of anxiety, which a pandemic obviously will bring about.
Yeah, let me add to that. I mean, in a couple different ways. First of all, I've heard people say, I'm vaccinated and I still got the disease. So, what's the point? And the point is that if you look at the people who are hospitalized, the people who are sick, 80 to 90% of them are people who are unvaccinated. So what getting immunized means is that you're going to vastly reduce the chance of serious illness. And that is the biggest thing, because you might not die from a minor case, but you could still die from a severe case, and you're much more likely to have that happen if you haven't had immunization yet. That's part one. Part two is that people in the developmental disabilities community in particular have some special risks. there actually is some very nice research done right here in New York State that showed that the mortality and serious illness risk for younger people with developmental disabilities was much higher than the general population when they caught COVID. So it's not just, well, if you're young, you're not going to get sick. If you're young, have developmental disabilities, you're at a much higher risk of getting seriously sick if you catch COVID and you're unimmunized. So those are 2 points. We can come back around to those multiple times and from different angles, but those are important things to say right at the beginning.
So just because the infection rate has gone down doesn't mean that folks who have underlying health conditions are out of danger if they were to be infected by COVID-19. Is that correct?
Absolutely. This is it's a strain of a virus that's very similar. There are other coronaviruses that infect humans, but this came from an animal species, so it's very different. And we're constantly learning new things about how this manifests certain diseases. So people originally thought this is going to be like a cold or a flu. What we've come to learn, among many things, is that this is a very pro-thrombotic, pro-clotting, and vascular inflammation disease. So people develop things like heart attacks and strokes and blood clots to their lungs soon after they get infected from this because of what happens within the body, and not just because they may have developed some type of pneumonia. They also do develop a severe type of pneumonia. So there's many ways in which this disease manifests itself. And if people are predisposed to infection, as well as having difficulties, relaying their symptoms, communicating, it's going to be real difficult to discern what is going on with a person, whether they have COVID or not. And at least if they're vaccinated, you can feel much, much more secure that the rate of severe disease, being hospitalized with COVID, requiring oxygen, going to the ICU, and death goes way down with getting a complete series. And among those who are susceptible, getting boosted.
Really important points. Yeah, and I know you wanted to talk about the statistics.
Yes, according to the American Association on Health and Disability, they had a survey project involving 4,131 diverse adults with disabilities. 20% said that they will not take the vaccine, and the 17% said that they were not sure about taking the vaccine. As a physician, these numbers surprise you, and yes or no, and why, according to this survey?
You want me to go, huh, Steve? So it's not surprising. As pediatricians, we deal with a lot of vaccine hesitancy, and that's something that has just grown more rapidly. There's a lot of confusion out there, but it's more confusion that is created from anxiety and concern. When people have concerns, when there's anxiety, when there's unknowns, that's where conspiracies can fill in. And so as health professionals, we need to get the truth out as quick as possible, because without that, conspiracy theories will run rampant. People will say things, I heard, my sister had a problem after she got the vaccine, and, those type of things get spread around much quicker. And in the lack of truth or delay in the truth coming out in terms of, we're trying to be thorough with the research and the data, these conspiracies fill the plate, and then people will jump onto those because those provide somewhat of a reassurance to us. Like, if I don't feel okay with that, this alternate theory, I feel a little more comfortable with. The fact that it's detached from reality and not true is a big problem. And so we really run into these issues, and it's very hard. I have found people who have been very concerned and seem very hesitant, very, very hesitant. But as I'm able to talk to them and go through specific questions or concerns they have, I've reassured a number of people, not many, of what to go through. But it's, what you'd experience, where the risks are. But it's also the type of thing now that people who aren't getting the vaccine now really are really entrenched in a certain belief that doesn't really match up with the science or evidence, or still have extreme amounts of anxiety. And I have seen people with, just significant levels of anxiety, not just needle phobia, but that on top of the whole pandemic, and trying to provide reassurance to those people in the best way we can really has has done wonders, where I've seen people who have walked out of the vaccine site 2 or 3 times, finally come back and get it and are just much better. But
there are some people, this is not true for everybody, obviously, but there are some people who want to take no risk. They say, if there's any chance of a risk, this is not for me. And what those folks are doing is not considering relative risks. I mean, if you've got a 1 in 10 chance of a bad thing happening, but a 1 in a million chance of a bad thing happening with the vaccine, then why not take the 1 in a million chance of the bad thing happening instead of the 1 in 10 chance of the bad thing happening if you happen to catch the disease? Those relative risks are part of a problem because it's why lottery tickets get sold. People think, hey, I might win, but they usually don't. So the low risk things don't happen very often. But when people are worried about vaccines, that's what they worry about, these very, very low risk things.
How often do you both find yourself having to sort of explain what it means, like what risk means, and sort of giving the sort of examples that you gave, Dr. Sulkes, to help patients better understand what it means to risk taking the vaccine versus risk not having the vaccine, especially if you're somebody who is immunocompromised?
It's always a struggle, and I think we overassume that we simplify things. So I try to always make sure I can give a simple example, because we know health literacy, digital literacy are not our strong points in this country. So if I can explain something as, all right, it's a 1 in a million chance that you could develop a blood clot after getting this vaccine, I would have to vaccinate you 10 times a day, every day of the year for 10, 12 years in order to assure that you got a vaccine, got one of those blood clots. Those type of examples sometimes are the best ways to present it. A lot of the side effects that first came out, the real severe ones, were on par with 1 in 500,000, 1 in 800,000, things that are like, you're as likely to be struck by lightning. And people seem to know that or don't seem to know that. And when I've heard people say, well, I heard someone already had that, I said, so if it's that rare and you heard of someone getting it, it's even less likely you're going to get it. So trying to do the simple math is one strategy I've used that I think has helped some people.
Sabina, you mentioned immunocompromise, and that's another thing that people get confused about. There are a couple different issues with immunity that come up in this. One is that if a person doesn't have good immune response, they're going to be more susceptible to the infection. That's part one. Part two is that they might not mount as good a response to the vaccine, and therefore need boosters to make sure they get they get a response. But the flip side is some people have conditions that are because of overactive immune systems, and people worry that because they've got a condition that is an autoimmune condition, like arthritis or other examples, that they're going to make it worse with the vaccine because they're jazzing up their immune system. And it actually makes me smile a lot because I see ads for products completely unrelated to vaccines to strengthen your immune system. And I never know whether that means it's better to fight off infection or it's make you less likely to attack yourself. And a stronger immune system isn't necessarily something you want if you have an autoimmune condition. Personally, I'm on medicine for arthritis to help me not mount such a big immune response. And so my doctor tells me, come off that medicine so that you have a good response to the vaccine when you get your shot. And I have to make some adjustments to do that. But people get confused about the immune system often.
Yeah, thank you so much, both. Great information, definitely. And now this question has been like always out there. People are asking how this vaccine was developed so quickly. How they are scared to get this vaccine because it's a new vaccine, and they ask why they haven't developed a vaccine for illnesses that has been for decades. They're out there. I mean, what is your response to that concern that people are bringing up always in all panels?
So this is one of my favorite questions to answer. So pre-pandemic, when a drug company is making a new vaccine or a new drug, they have to front the money. They have to start the science and the research. So they'll start it on cells and animals. And if they find something that works, then they'll go to a bigger animal. And they start with a mouse and go to a rabbit to a monkey. And they do everything in series. So they're not going to go to that next set of experiments till the first set works. And then they're not going to go from small animals to large animals to people till they see it work. And because they're fronting the funds, they only take those few that are successful. So that's why initial drugs take so long to be made. Now in pandemic response, CDC, preventive health, I mean, literally, this is what pandemic and public health people have been sadly, but not excitedly waiting to respond to for decades. There's always been a concern. There's been 2 SARS outbreaks in the past 20 years. One was called SARS, one was called MERS. So they already had a sense that this coronavirus could come out and we would have to make a vaccine, most likely to the spike protein. So that's always been kind of the secret plan in the background. So as soon as this virus started to emerge and the DNA was shared worldwide, the pattern of the virus itself, the federal government, other nations started manufacturing what they feel the vaccine would work with. But instead of doing a whole series of studies in series, one after the other, they had labs that were already funded to do research on animals and primates quickly, as well as engage the drug companies. And they told the drug companies, if you come out with something, you do all these studies, not in series, in parallel, we will pay for them. And so they don't have to front their money. So it's really a big financial piece. The other thing, whenever a drug is being made or a vaccine, they won't start manufacturing it until it's finished with the full study that the FDA is the large human studies, it's going to be reviewed by the FDA. So they don't even start making it till after that. Federal government knew that would be an issue as well. They don't have manufacturing plants, so they went to the pharmaceutical industries as well and said, listen, if you start a large clinical trial because it's promising, so in 2-3 months, they did a lot of these animal studies, first safety studies in people. And then when they started the large trials with literally tens of thousands of people, they said, start manufacturing it. We will pay for that. And if it fails, we'll cover the cost. So that's really how this happened. Okay. I mean, so it wasn't the capitalistic financial model of, take your bet on this chemical, then that one, it works. There's a number of vaccines that were started and didn't make it to the full clinical trials, but those costs were absorbed as part of it. So it wasn't a matter of doing these in series. It was really doing them all at once in such a way, because this is a global problem. I mean, let's face it, if we had unchecked virus without vaccines, the death impact of this would be tenfold.
Those clinical trials that you mentioned, did they take into consideration people who have underlying health conditions, or did those trials just run based on people who were completely healthy?
Initially, they had to try to get as many people enrolled as possible. So they needed to try to get a wide age range. That was really, again, if you think about, they were starting to plan these trials March, April, May of that first year of 2020. So they didn't have a sense of who's going to be more susceptible. We were just seeing that, okay, elderly were obviously the biggest age group, but we were seeing young adults, people in their middle ages and 20s, and even youth getting the disease and dying. So they really had to say, all right, we need to test this in adults as broadly, as quickly as possible, as many people, and try to figure out if there are certain groups. As they started ramping those up and getting a better sense of safety, probably after 6 months of these clinical trials, they did start to say, all right, let's see if we can enroll people who are immunosuppressed to a mild degree, or if they have, they didn't exclude people with who are immunocompromised, but they were hesitant to enroll them, but they did have people who had diabetes, hypertension, asthma, some other underlying conditions. Enrolling people who are developmentally disabled is really tricky, because it's a population that we have to still have safety and have consent involved in the process. So certain populations, children, we didn't even start those studies till well into the rollout of the adult vaccine. So while they sought to try to reach as broad a population as possible, they did have to proceed with some caution at the beginning.
I want to
just amplify a point that Dr. Cook made. The research in people with developmental disabilities is tricky because it's often difficult for people with developmental disabilities to consent in an informed way to participating in a research study, just as it is for little kids. So what they've tried to do initially was to test the vaccine in people who could consent, and then roll it out for people when it seemed safe for the general population, roll it out for people with developmental disabilities in the same age ranges. And so access to the vaccine for people who have developmental disabilities has been at the same age as the general population. There's never been much difference laid out in terms of vaccine availability for people with developmental disabilities because of the safety issues, to be sure that there weren't differences. And differences have not really emerged very much in terms of side effects for this population, for people with developmental disabilities, or in terms of response to the vaccine, in terms of antibody response and that sort of stuff. So it's a balance of the safety of the study versus the safety of the vaccine, and wanting people to have the benefit of the vaccine. But it's understandable why people would say, well, this wasn't initially researched and tested in this population, so how do we know it's really safe? The other answer to that is that people with developmental disabilities as a group, on the one hand, often have other health problems that puts them at risk for complications of COVID. On the other hand, though, it's a kind of blended group. I mean, there are people within the world of developmental disabilities who have more risks of autoimmune conditions, more risks of not being able to fight off infections well, and who have no different risk than anybody else. Having developmental disability, having intellectual disability in itself doesn't make you any different risk. It's the cause of your developmental disability that might change your risk. And so that begins to be a subdivided population. We start slicing up the developmental disability population in a way that then we start looking at, well, people with Down syndrome, people with spina bifida, people with cerebral palsy, people with autism spectrum disorders, and saying, are there risks that are different in each of those?
In terms of risk, let's say in the rare instance when an individual does have a severe reaction or some form of reaction to the first dose of the vaccine, more so than the average person, would you recommend then that they get the second dose? And if you do, what kind of measures are expected for doctors when administering the second dose for somebody who may have had an adverse reaction to the first dose of the vaccine?
So it's really important understanding what people experience. Again, I worked at one of these mass vaccination sites. And at one point we did 3,500 vaccines in a 10, 11 hour period at the one location I worked at here in Rochester at the Dome Arena. And we had a lot of people who right after would say, oh, I feel like my hands are tingling, or I feel like my lips are swelling a little. And a lot of times those symptoms are their nerves, it's anxiety, and it's actually the release of the anxiety of the fact that they got through it, and their body's adrenaline is kind of coming down. And I can tell you, everyone I met who had that, literally everyone, coming back, let's sit down, have some bottled water. Here, want a juice box, want some graham crackers. They did great. The people who had severe reactions, we did over 246,000 doses at our location. We had 2 anaphylaxis reactions. So that is an allergic reaction that becomes very severe. There's a severe itching, rash breaks out, and their blood pressure can start to get compromised. They were given a shot of adrenaline. We had an ambulance crew right there. They were sent out. So the chance of those severe ones are really rare. We had many people, though, who had that type of nervous reaction. Or you have people who pass out. They see a needle, they pass out. Or after they get their shot, they get a little dizzy and lightheaded. That's called a vasovagal reaction. That happens. Invariably, it's the tall, muscular dude who doesn't tell us that he passes out with vaccines. And then as he's walking back, down he goes. Those are always the really good ones to see. But so the reality is, of those people who had severe reactions, we worked really closely with the allergy specialists in our region to test people who said, oh, I got home and I started having some hives and some itching and I took a Benadryl and I felt fine. Because we probably had, 50, 60, 70 of those where they're right after they left, because we always made everyone wait at least 15 minutes, some people 30, but maybe an hour, 2, 3 hours later, they experienced something and they did something to try to get rid of it. We referred them to our allergy specialists at Rochester General, at Strong. They did a wonderful job reviewing these people's histories. In some cases, if it was more severe or there was questions, they did some blood work, maybe tested them. And a few times, if there was maybe a bad allergy history and some possible reaction, they would give them the vaccine in their office in a graded dose. So as opposed to a single shot, they give them like 1/100th of a dose, then 1/50th of a dose, then 1/10th of a dose, then 1/4 of a dose, and the rest. And they space them in like 15-minute intervals. And then they keep them there an extra hour or 2 and watch them. And they did that. And I worked for about 7-8 months with that team. I still talk with them regularly, and our large vaccination sites. They had like 150, 200 people referred to them. They did that type of vaccinating maybe 5 or 6 times. So the chance of severe reactions like anaphylaxis, very rare. The chance of other types of reactions, again, still, even milder reactions that wouldn't prohibit you from getting the vaccine are pretty rare, and there are ways we can get around those if we need to. And that's really important, because the allergists have really been great to work with, and unfortunately are so concerned because people have had maybe a mild reaction that wasn't an allergy at all, and somehow we're misinformed that they shouldn't get the vaccine. And the reality is they really should, because it is safe. The other reactions that have come up with these vaccines, again, something new, was an inflammation around the heart, something called myocarditis. And that is something that we saw with the messenger RNA vaccines, specifically the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine. And that's because we know these vaccines work so well, and we've been working and trying to use messenger RNA as a vaccine for well over a decade, if not actually longer, I believe. It's always been the side effects because it triggers such a strong immune response. So myocarditis is inflammation around the heart. Well, if you get COVID, one of the things it does, if you remember I said before, it's very pro-inflammatory, pro-thrombotic. It causes clots and inflammation. So people get myocarditis, inflammation around the heart, when they get a primary COVID infection. And it's probably about 1 in 1,000 people can get some type of cardiac inflammation when they get COVID. Now, with this vaccine, we saw it in actually young, mostly males, males in their 20s, and that's because testosterone, we know, triggers this type of reaction in the heart. When we look at just myocarditis from other viruses, men get it more than women, usually young men, because again, testosterone has this kind of additive effect that it triggers that. Still, we would see that in 1 in 100,000, 1 in 200,000 young men. So still very rare type of side effect that we did not see with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And so it's really important to know that we have alternatives. We have different vaccines that are available in the case of those rare type of side effects that are really only specific to the vaccine.
Dr. Steve, do you have something to add there? Okay. Now let's talk a little about the insurance coverages. In New York State, the COVID-19 vaccine is offered to anyone, including this without insurance. If a patient that without health insurance had a question about the vaccine related to their health conditions, can these questions be answered by the physician administering the vaccine prior to the vaccine? Where do you suggest these persons without insurance to go and ask questions? And more important, what questions or what medical history before receiving the vaccine they should know to share with these doctors?
So one of the most important things to understand is you do not need health insurance to get the vaccine. The government has paid for this. The government has arranged, actually through Medicare, the Medicare funding mechanism, to pay doctors to administer it in their office. When the vaccine was first rolled out, they sent it out to mass vaccination sites into hospitals. And then they worked on ways to reimburse doctors for administering in their office. A patient should never get a charge for the COVID vaccine. Okay, these are paid for. If they go to a pharmacy, if they go to a clinic, oh, well, we have to, charge you, the government doesn't pay for the administration fee. They're not allowed to do that. So that's illegal. And if they do that, they should call you guys and be reported to the law, because that's illegal. Okay. But it's also important, if they don't have a doctor and they don't know who to ask, starting with a pharmacy would be a good place. Pharmacists have become a huge asset to the pandemic response, for testing, for vaccines, for a lot of reasons. And so I say that because I've worked with a lot of them, and I'm thinking, all right, people may be like, oh, I don't want to try to make an appointment at a doctor's office. You want to go to an emergency room or urgent care for it, but you could go into a pharmacy and probably ask for advice. That said, if they're not sure, calling the county health department. Every county health department has some mechanism for a vaccine clinic, because county health departments are kind of the safety net for that. So if Livingston County doesn't have a vaccine clinic that they staff and run, they probably run it through one of their hospitals. And so through that, there's going to be nurses at the very least who are very experienced with giving vaccines, who could answer those questions, because they're also part of that backbone of team that have had to give these vaccines and responded to people. So I think there's a lot of options out there. Please don't Google it. Don't look it up on Facebook. Don't make a TikTok video about it or Instagram or anything, because you're not going to get the right answer there. But there are plenty of experts available through county health departments and through pharmacies.
And I would just add that most people who have developmental disabilities in New York State have primary physicians. If you're served by OPWD, they want to make sure that you have a primary physician. That's a good person to ask. That person is familiar with your individual health profile, can make suggestions about which vaccine might be better for you, whether one or another might carry some specific risk based on, again, some very specific health problem that the individual has. So people who don't have other resources should certainly take advantage of everything that Dr. Cook just said. But if you have a primary physician, that's the person to start with every time.
Thank you. But for those who don't have insurance, the first point to start will be the pharmacy, right?
I would say a pharmacy. I would say their county health department. They'll have a phone number you can call.
Let's make sure to add in the notes.
Really great information. And, it sounds like both of you as physicians, you take the time to speak to your patients about their concerns, and from what you've mentioned, medical professionals should take the time to sit down with their patients who have these hesitancies and anxieties and really work through them. I was reading a a memo by the Association of State and Territorial Health Officials, and they mentioned that previous trauma in healthcare settings reduces trust, and that hesitancy by individuals with disabilities regarding getting the vaccine also may be related to their personal or their historical trauma from the healthcare system, such as provider discrimination or feelings of judgment. What are your thoughts about this, and what can the medical community do to address these types of traumas and gain trust from individuals who may have experienced that trauma in the healthcare system and may not feel as comfortable sharing the reasons why they're hesitant to get the vaccine?
You know, this is an extremely important point. It's something that we've just not thought of as healthcare providers, of how people have been treated by the healthcare system, their experience with the healthcare system, that makes them hesitant to go. Sometimes it's, I'm in my 50s, and I'm thinking of my parents and grandparents of when I was younger, them not wanting to go to the doctor, because it was a lot of times more a matter of, you only go to the doctor if you're really sick and you get bad news. It used to be you only go to the hospital to die. You know, that was kind of a belief that my parents and grandparents had. Actually, my grandparents more. I'm gonna go to the hospital. That's a death sentence. But now we have more access to care, so we think it's better, but not if the system is too rushed. And so I would also add a point that while we've tried to increase access to care and availability of care, we've pushed our healthcare providers too much from the standpoint of, trying to just churn through patients. And our nurses, our doctors, our physician assistants, our phone team have to answer and respond so often that that's actually a stress back on them. And with that stress and that cognitive overload, they lose their empathy. So at the same point, I've said, talk to your primary care doctor, ask him questions about this. I've also heard people like, I tried to talk to my doctor and they just said, it's conspiracy theory, just get the freaking vaccine. Because that provider has been getting beaten down with so much going on with the pandemic, trying to keep their business open, trying to serve their patients, trying to respond to insurance, trying to answer questions, that it's really been a battle on both sides. So I think it is important for people to try to, again, find a trusted source, someone they can go to. It's always easier for me to say this than to do this because every situation is individual. But we're trying to make a better awareness of the trauma that the healthcare system can have on people. So I think that is getting there. It's certainly not good enough probably, but it's also a matter of us trying to say, all right, we need to slow down and prioritize what do we need to do with the time we have with our patients. Steve may have.
In the world of developmental disabilities, what you're describing is notorious. I mean, people talk about this all the time, about being rushed, not being listened to, about having their real concerns not be attended to, rather than what the doctor thought was supposed to be talked about. And hopefully we are creating structures that help healthcare providers be more thoughtful and be more responsive. I have a lot of patients who have real significant sensory needs, and who if we have to send them to have blood drawn, we have to have our staff be prepared to have music playing, to have the area numbed up. Sometimes we even have to cluster immunizations around procedures where the person's being sedated. And it's all about helping the person get used to the situation, creating visual schedules to say, here's what's going to happen, including activities that help the person be distracted. I'm going to just say, with regard to COVID immunization specifically, it, for me, was one of the least painful shots I've ever gotten. Okay, and I think a lot of people say that. This is, if you're worried about getting a shot and having it hurt, this one really didn't much. So by comparison to other immunizations I've had, this one was really mild. Okay, and so going to a place that knows the individual, that the individual knows and has been to, is going to be helpful too. the kind of big, busy dome arena immunization clinics that Dr. Cook has participated in are moving people through fast and sensitively, but it's still a big, noisy, scary environment compared to what goes on in a familiar health provider's office. And so going to a familiar place with people who know the individual and can be reassuring, having the supports that need to be there, that can make a world of difference. And this, like any other anxiety producing health situation, needs to be attended to.
Thank you both. Let's talk a little about children. As a pediatrician, I am sure that you have received concern from parents regarding their children receiving the vaccine. Is there any difference in risk or in the ways that children react to the vaccine compared to the adults? And how are the children who are either very young or nonverbal monitored after receiving the vaccine? As well, what kind of symptoms should parents look out for after this vaccine in their children?
So this is a great question. This is why it's taken a little longer to get the vaccine out for children, because the most important thing is that they're safe. The second most important is that we see some good effect. And so I don't want to say the easy part, but the easy part of vaccinating adults is when we do the first phases of the study, we try different doses in adults and see how their response is. And then we have a process called a bridge study. If you think about it, if the adult goes here, we can reach the kid by going to a bridge. And so we say, all right, if it's 10 milligrams in a teenager, then maybe 5 will work in a preteen. And it really is kind of guesswork. And we might look at the animal models to give us an idea, okay, a mature ape, 10 milligrams in a premature ape or a child ape, I guess, what was the amount of difference that we saw in animals? I don't like using animals if we don't have to, but this is a way that's, we're trying to not use people. So we found that there are good ways to start with that dosing and to try to find the safe spot. The reality is that the side effect profile in kids is probably even milder than adults, mostly because their immune system is still kind of maturing and stuff. The side effects we've seen in adults has been fatigue, headache, fever, chills, maybe some cough. It's kind of a practice infection. And because we've been so hesitant about eliciting any side effects in kids, they've kind of gone with lower doses. And the key question is, are we getting a good enough antibody response? And so it's taken a little longer to be able to see that with the kids. The one vaccine, the messenger RNA vaccines, the Pfizer and the Moderna, we did see this myocarditis really in teenagers though, because it's related to puberty and after they've started puberty and gone through puberty. So that myocarditis we've not seen in the younger kids, the 5 to 11-year-olds, almost no cases of it, as opposed to the teenagers and young men in their 20s. So that one thing that parents were so worried about just never manifest in this young age group. The other thing that's really important with all vaccines is their side effects. They occur 2 ways. Immediate type of reactions within 24 hours. That's usually an allergy type of reaction because it's the immediate response from the body, or what might be considered long-term. Long-term for a vaccine is 2 months, okay? You take 1 dose of a medicine and your body uses it and it's gone. Now, if you take a medicine for your cholesterol and you take it twice a day, every day for years, sure, you can have long-term side effects because you're kind of, chronically exposed to it. But the way vaccines work is because they trigger the immune system to react to something. If there's not an immediate reaction within 24 hours, or if there's not a reaction within 2 months, and those are what we call cross reactions. So the myocarditis, we would see it about 2 weeks to 3 weeks because for some reason, the messenger RNA triggered the body's immune system to start to have a reaction towards the lining of the heart. The blood clot problem we saw with the J&J, similar type of problem where it attacked platelets or cells that cause blood clots and set women up for that. And again, we found that mostly in women of childbearing age, this blood clot problem, which was again, about 1 in 600,000 women might get that. But that's when you see it, within 2 months. at the most, okay? There's other side effects sometimes we see with vaccines, something called Guillain-Barré syndrome. That's a type of nerve reaction where the body's immune system kind of reacts to nerves, and you get this weakness or ascending weakness that starts with the legs and works its way up the body. That's actually very treatable and can go away. I had a colleague who developed that about a month after getting a flu shot, and they couldn't pinpoint anything else. So they said, well, it might have been the flu shot. So these things can occur. But what's really important to understand is there's nothing past that. Because one of the biggest conspiracies I heard was infertility. This vaccine is going to cause infertility. This vaccine is going to cause miscarriages. First of all, we would have seen that from the studies, because even though they excluded women who were pregnant, they counseled them, they asked them to provide 2 forms of birth control or proof they're using birth control in the study, people still got pregnant during these vaccine studies, and the pregnancies went fine. The other thing that's important to know is that the antibodies react to part of the virus. That's how the immune system works. So if antibodies would harm, antibodies from a vaccine would harm the body, harm a woman or a man in a way that could cause infertility, we would see that related to the primary infection. And we don't see that. Now we see blood vessels doing damage to, the blood vessels getting damaged in men and women that can lead to fertility issues from an infection of coronavirus. But if the vaccine had some type of response like that, you would see not a rare miscarriage or spontaneous abortion, you would see all of them. You would see tons of them because this vaccine reacts so strongly. And this was a conspiracy that came out of Europe, out of a vaccine researcher for some reason who said, well, this vaccine is going to cause an antibody. It looks like an antibody on the placenta. Well, if that were the case, then women who are pregnant who got COVID would have a miscarriage right away because the body's immune system tries to fight it off. And all these women who've been vaccinated would have had miscarriages within 1 to 2 months of getting their vaccine. And the reality is we've just not seen that. So there is no long-term past 2 months. And this is something that's really hard for people to understand. And we've not done a good job as doctors, as vaccine experts, immunologists, in terms of explaining that. And I think it's our own ignorance, our own kind of arrogance of just saying, well, we know this isn't a problem, but we've never explained that to the lay public. And if it's not explained to the lay public and there's a big question out there, conspiracy theory will fill that void.
In response to the question about immunizations for younger kids, it's a trickier question for another reason too. We all like to think of vaccines as either you're protected or you're not protected, but there's protected from getting anything, and then there's protection from serious illness. Okay, and low dose vaccine that doesn't prevent you from catching the bug can still prevent you from getting seriously ill from it. And so there's this desire to find the right dose for kids that prevents serious illness but doesn't cause side effects. So they're sort of in a middle zone there. You don't want to give such a big dose that you have more side effect risks, but you don't want to give such a low dose that you don't get serious, that you get serious side effects. But and still lower would be that you're not protected at all, And so there's this range that they're shooting for. And as Dr. Cook said, you start with what seems to work for adults, and then you take an educated guess at what at the dose that would work for many kids. I have a friend whose granddaughter is big for her age, and she's about to turn 5, and when they approve the dose for younger kids, she's going to get a lower dose than a 6-year-old would get, most likely. And my friend says she should be getting the 6-year-old dose because she's the size of a 6-year-old. Those variations can create confusion and be tricky in terms of how to set a policy for who gets what.
Say at this point, are we still in the guessing phase with kids, or are we sort of know how much children in general on average should be receiving when it comes to the dosage?
So we have a good sense of it, or well, so we know the 5 to 11-year-olds, we're seeing a good antibody response. I think never let perfect be the enemy of good. We have a good response. We have a lot of protection that we've seen. As the virus has evolved, if younger kids aren't getting as ill from this version as opposed to the earlier versions, that's great also. But if they're not vaccinated, it's still going to cause some of those children to get severe problems. And it's still causing long-term effects, antibody responses, long COVID, other things that we know the vaccine actually reduces the risk of. So we know we have a good dose in the 5 to 11-year-olds, and the data is coming out that suggests we have some good doses in the younger age group. The question is, should it be 2 shots or 3 shots? That is part of the nuance. And so that's why they're taking more time. But it's also hard to enroll. I mean, we had 70,000 people in one of the large adult vaccines. And for kids 6 months to 5 years, they have like 3, 4, 5,000 kids trying to get it up to 6, 7,000 kids. So you want to be able to have enough kids, but someone's got to sign up to put their child in those studies. So the balance is getting enough kids into those studies to make sure that we can see a good effect as well as with the safety. I think we have, there's 3 vaccines now that have been studied, and my understanding is their data is at the FDA, the Moderna, the Pfizer, as well as something called Novacare, or Novavax, I'm sorry, that also has data in the younger children. And when that's going to come out from the FDA is anyone's guess. It's not clear. It's good that we're seeing good responses. It's good that we're seeing less severe disease, but we still have, this portion of the population that's really not protected, and we've got to take some steps. And the question is, how good a dose and how good a response do we need to have? We don't have 2 or 3 years to test 5 or 6 different doses and have enough kids each getting that dose to tell what the difference should be.
We got a question from, Dr. Steve, do you have something to add?
Go ahead, that's okay.
Okay. So we had a question from the audience right now. The question is, when you speak about the risk of serious illnesses, does include, or do they know yet, risk of long COVID symptoms, even if the patient reaction to the initial COVID exposure was somewhat mild?
We're still trying to get a better definition of that, but we're seeing people who have a mild case of COVID and get long COVID symptoms. And I say mild as in, the way we've defined COVID as moderate to severe means you're hospitalized, usually on oxygen. Moderate being in the hospital on oxygen, severe being in the ICU on oxygen and maybe a ventilator, and whatever's past that is even worse, if not death. So if you think of, we're decreasing the chance of moderate to severe disease hospitalization greatly. Mild disease, you could be laid up at home feeling like garbage for 3 days, but that's considered mild disease because you're not needing oxygen, you don't need additional support. The problem is if you have type 2 diabetes or you have asthma and you're getting infected with that, you might get sicker and might need some oxygen, some additional help. So there's kind of a balance between the two there. And what we see is that these vaccines are extremely effective against moderate to severe disease, but they don't completely block spread in terms of there will always be some cases, there will be some breakthrough. And I had once heard a joke, lots of people are turning positive from the COVID vaccine, but how many people are getting hospitalized? Well, that's kind of like saying Serena Williams and I both play tennis, okay? I can play tennis, she can really play tennis. It's day and night in terms of the difference, being positive and hospitalized with disease.
We got, what about the people who are dying after they are vaccinated from COVID? I know there is a big point is if you are less likely to get severely ill or dead, but there are plenty that are.
So I think it's really important to know specifically what's going on. So people who have weak immune systems, they get 2 shots, 3 shots. Depending on the severe type of immune problem they have, even that sometimes isn't good enough. People who've had organ transplants, people who are actively undergoing chemotherapy, we give them 2, 3, 4 shots even, and they mount not a great response sometimes because that other disease they have is taking too much and is weakening their immune system so much. But the other reality is that they're not 100% effective. 97% effective means 100 people, of 100 people, 3% will get severe disease. So if it's still 97% effective after 2 or 3 doses, you will get people who will get sicker. The biggest driver in those cases are chronic conditions and age, and even healthy age. If you're 80 and healthy as anything, your immune system naturally wanes and actually gets weaker. Your body reserves are less and stuff. And so that the stress of getting a major COVID illness will still lead to some deaths, but the difference is, it may have been, 1 in 20, 1 in 50 people in the first winter wave that we had who got severe disease, who died. Okay. Now, this past winter, it may have been 1 in 100. And it was still, still having some deaths, but the number of cases that we had this past winter compared to the actual number of deaths, it was just a far, far different number. And just, again, it's not going to be completely eliminated, but it's far better than what we were staring at the first 6 months to a year going through this.
There are 2 other spins on the answer to that question that I want to point out. And I think what Dr. Cook just said was the main answer to the question. But a second answer is that people get vaccinated and then they might die, but not from COVID. And people would say, well, they got vaccinated and then they had a pneumonia and they died, and everyone assumes it was from COVID, but it might not have been. So it's important to make sure that when a person dies after having, despite being immunized, that you really get the story, because you might not have died from COVID. And the other spin on the question is people dying from the vaccination, which is not something that happens in any degree. Even the people who get the myocarditis generally get over it without any lasting problems. So if you've heard that someone died from the vaccination, that was probably not accurate information.
The other thing that can happen is, if, especially early on when we were first rolling out vaccine, it takes usually 2 weeks after your second dose to get a good response. So if you got exposed to someone in between that window, it's entirely possible you could die, and it would look like, oh, well, I got the vaccine. They got the vaccine 2 weeks later, they got sick and they died from COVID. Well, was it the vaccine? Was it COVID? It is tough to tell. And it's really important to have the transparency of what really happened with that. And that's something that's just not happened.
Any final thoughts that you, Dr. Sulkes or Dr. Cook, that you have for the audience? The information you've provided us thus far is super, super valuable.
I have continued to say, just to repeat what we've already said today, to the families and individuals with developmental disabilities, that it is still way, way better to get immunized than not. You are protecting yourself against a potentially dangerous infection. The risk that comes with the infection is still way higher than the risk of problems that might come from the immunization, from the vaccination. But and some people still worry, and I say, I'm a developmental disabilities person. I'm not an infectious disease expert. Talk to your primary physician and think about your individual situation.
I think it's really important to try to seek reliable resources of information, and hopefully having an opportunity like this is sharing information. I've had people follow up with me after events like this, because I've done speaker bureaus for this exact reason, and answer questions and been able to put them in touch with other resources. So trying to have someone you trust who's in the healthcare profession field who is able to take the time to explain and answer questions is really important. Unfortunately, we're not doing a great job giving ourselves enough time to serve our patients in those ways. But I think it's really important to understand that this is something that we as much as we like to think we can prepare for natural disasters and emergencies, we could not prepare for this. And, we'll always be looking back saying what should have, could have, what we could have done here. But, we now are well over a year into the active use of these vaccines. We know exactly how safe they are. We know exactly how effective they are. And so we should feel more comfortable with getting vaccinated.
I don't see any additional questions on my end. Deanna, do you see any?
No, I don't see any.
All right, with that, well, this has been, as I said, such an insightful and informative discussion, Dr. Cook and Dr. Sulkes. I know I've learned so much just sitting here and listening to you speak. Thank you for breaking it, the information down in such a very basic way that folks in the medical community could understand. Very, very helpful. And so thank you again for sharing this valuable information with us today. For our viewers, this panel is going to be published on our YouTube channel and available to access within, hopefully within the next few weeks with closed captioning and ASL interpretation. If you have any additional questions, feel free to either send your questions to the email that you received when you registered, or leave your questions in the comments on the YouTube channel. Just YouTube Disability Rights New York, go to the video section and it should be there. But otherwise, thank you all so much for attending, and thank you again, Dr. Sulkes and Dr. Cook. Much appreciated.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.